told us that this square attracts many different kinds of people. Are there universal qualities that attract everyone?
I would say it's the same qualities which attracts everyone. And I would say that Homo sapiens, wherever you are in the world, will work more or less in the same way. If you put a nice bench with a nice view, with a nice background, and with a nice orientation in relation to wind and sun, and where from the bench you can see other people.
Let us introduce to you these two gentlemen, Jan Gehl and David Sim, architects, urban planners, and authors who have dedicated their lives to the quest of making cities more livable. They transformed places around the world through an understanding of human nature and the soft touches that make urban life worth living. During their lifelong career, David and Jan showed how it's possible to build better cities, with attention on human scale and quality of our daily lives. They showed us the world where people come first, where every space invites connection and every street breathes life, where cities are designed not for cars, but for something far more valuable, people and their needs.
Really good question. What is a good city? There's something very basic about it being intuitive, easy to understand. You can immediately, you know how to use it. You know where you're supposed to walk, where you're allowed to go, what you can do. I think if there's a kind of maybe tolerance or a kind of slack, a city that maybe allows you to make mistakes as you find your way around, a city which is inviting, a city which offers you a good experience when you walk around.
As Homo sapiens, we are walking animal. We are made for walking, and all the best moments in our life is when you're standing, sitting, or moving slowly, because that's what we are made for. When we start to move fast, we cannot see other people and we cannot see details. What you can do here in a square like this is that everything is 5 kilometers an hour. You can see people walk around here. There are some very basic qualities, because this Homo sapiens, this walking animal, it always was very interested in other people. It's a social animal. And actually the biggest interest in our life, throughout our life, is other people. And sitting here on a square, what can you see here? Other people. And you can sit here for hours and hours because every moment is different. More people come and other types to come and wonder who that is and what is he doing and whatever. So every moment is different. You can sit for hours and hours and watch people.
What was amazing about what I learned from Jan was that this way of looking at people and looking at the city was universal, because it wasn't just good for Scotland or for Copenhagen, for Denmark, for Sweden. It could be applied to other places. And what's been really amazing for my professional life, to travel all over the planet, from Patagonia to Highlands of Scotland, from San Francisco to Japan to Tokyo, working in detail with both private developers and public sector. After the earthquake in New Zealand, in Christchurch, I worked with the city council. I became like a public officer for 3 months and really got their perspective of how to rebuild the city. So discovering that this knowledge, this approach could be applied to so many different places around the planet. And also, it was equally important from the public perspective and the private perspective.
Let's take a break for a moment. Imagine strolling down a lively street in Copenhagen, the aroma of fresh pastries and coffee in the air, the gentle hum of conversation around you. There are so many options to choose from. You've been walking for hours, but you haven't checked your watch once. In the past 40 years, the number of cafes in the city has nearly tripled, a small but telling sign of why Copenhagen is now one of the most livable cities in the world. It's a place where human needs, connection, comfort, and the simple joy of being outdoors are at the heart of its design. The simple pleasure of being outside feels so natural today. But this wasn't always the case. Just a few decades ago, Copenhagen, like so many cities around the world, was dominated by cars. How did this city achieve such a transformation?
every single space was occupied by motor cars in 1960. And then they started a movement of pushing back. Actually, people realized that the spaces which were public spaces, where in the old days they used to walk and meet, they were suddenly occupied by motor cars. And then started, of course, a counter movement. Let's push it back.
Such change didn't happen overnight. From the 1960s to the 1980s, Copenhagen was transformed by inviting people back to the streets, creating pedestrian-friendly spaces between buildings. The following decade focused on encouraging people to stop, sit, and enjoy a new dimension of city life. And in recent years, the city emphasizes promoting sports and recreational activities to enhance longevity and quality of life.
Every moment is different. You can sit for hours and hours and watch people. Fountain you can watch for a while, but only for a while. Then you know more or less what that is about. But people you can watch forever.
Right. But this is maybe an important link because many people in Central Europe would say, yes, Copenhagen's lovely, I've been there on holiday, it's so civilized, but we are not Danish. We could never be like Copenhagen.
If you talk about Central Europe, I have seen enough and worked enough in Central Europe to know that all these basic quality criteria for Homo sapiens, you can use them anywhere where there are Homo sapiens. And if you change a square in a Central European city based on these quality criteria, you will find in no time that they start to behave like Italians or maybe Slovakians or Czechs or Hungarians, whatever. Because we are all so like. I have had the chance to work in America. Actually, we work with Times Square and in New York. And everybody said that you can never expect any behavior like in Europe here, because this is a big apple and we are awake 24 hours a day, and New York is completely different from anything in Europe. Then we took the cars out of Times Square, and the day after it was just like any square in Europe, because they were Homo sapiens in New York also. And everybody was very surprised. And I was not, because I've seen it in so many places.
A crucial part of transforming any city, neighborhood, or even a single street corner lies in shifting perspective. Not too long ago, cities were designed from the vantage point of architects, as if seen from above, like a helicopter view. But this approach has evolved. Today, the focus isn't just on the buildings themselves, but on the spaces between them. The spaces where life happens. The viewpoint has come down from the sky to meet us at eye level, where our daily lives unfold.
I would tell about me being a young architect. I graduated in 1960. That is 62 years ago. And at that time, when I graduated, I was very interested in restoration and old buildings. And actually, I started working with an architect restoring medieval churches. He was a very nice Christian architect, which had a good reputation. And then to his office, one day came a man who had a big piece of land, and he said, "You are a good Christian architect. I would like you to build housing here, and it should be good for people." And that started a panic in the office. We were only 5, and we started to discuss what is good for people. Of course, everything architects do is good. No, it was not enough to say that. So we started to discuss what is really a housing area good for people. And we realized that we did not know. And I was married to a psychologist. And then I went home to my wife, Ingrid, and said, "We have this client, he wants something good for people. And we don't know exactly what could be done to make it good for people." And she said, "I'll go in the university and ask my professors what's good for people." So she came home from university and said they didn't know either. So the psychologists didn't know, and the sociologists didn't know, and the architects didn't know. We didn't know what was good for people, and still the idea was that what is outside the housing is just as important as what is inside. And my wife was invited to come and join the Danish Building Research Institute as the first housing psychologist in the history of Denmark. So we started in the mid-60s to work on these areas. And I went back to School of Architecture to take up this research position. The first thing I said was ask, why didn't you tell me anything about good for people while I was studying? And then we realized they didn't tell you anything because they knew nothing. And after a little while, I realized that there was no knowledge at all about good for people. And then we realized we had to find out ourselves.
While I was at architecture school, I was 19, and I heard a series of lectures by Gehl. And it kind of, I suppose it changed my life. It set me on a completely different track. But it made me understand the importance of creating a really good platform for people to understand how people live, to understand how people use spaces. So architecture school in Scotland, we did all these studies, we went out, we observed, we counted people, we saw how they behaved in public places. And that approach stayed with me throughout my studies. Eventually, I managed to get to Scandinavia. I studied with Jan in Copenhagen. And then after that, I would come back regularly to Jan to ask questions. And then for like 17 years, I worked together with Jan in his office in Copenhagen. And even now, when I have my own company, I still go back. It's like going to the source. So I guess, maybe you might go to Mecca. I go back to Jan and, ask questions.
We realized that people like very much to be together. So there's no need to spread people out like that. And now we all the time go for mixed-use cities and to have living and housing and recreation and working and education, have that together in the same areas, the same houses maybe. And that's the basic idea of the 15-minute city, that everyone should be able to find most of what he needs inside what he can walk.
Gehl is a very good storyteller. And I think I've learned this storytelling technique. And it's about making the questions about building, the questions about city life, making them relevant. They're engineers and mayors, politicians, architects, developers. They're people. They're moms, they're dads, there's brothers and sisters, they have children, they have grandchildren. And if you remind them of who they are as human beings, I think that's the way to connect them to this other narrative about the human experience. Because regardless of our role, where we are in society, we're all people. And just if you think about how we interact with the city, what makes a good city, that's the touching point, I think, for making processes which work, to make good projects, to make cities people want to live in.
And so I think one of the legacies of Jan is really communicating architecture in a very, very direct way, where people can use, and I use, the anecdotes he tells about his urban environment as a way of understanding the city and how we can do better. And I think Jan is not only a great architect, but he's maybe an even better communicator. That is maybe his real superpower.
You've talked about the facts. I don't know, we can talk about the facts of life between buildings and collecting data. But I think actually, do you not think a bigger influence is how you make those facts relevant? So have you always been a storyteller, and have the stories changed? Because you always reflected that you talk about stories when you had children, stories later in life with grandchildren. Have the stories changed, or do they have the same character?
Of course, I think that this storytelling is important for the communication. And I also realize that when my books have got really far around, it is because many people can relate directly and say, hey, that could be me. Hey, that could be my children. They also do that. My grandfather do that. And that makes it more relevant and more lively. Being quite old by now, I've come to realize what a fantastic thing it is to be old. And one of the good things being old is you can see the project you started being finished, and people who live there use them. They come out and say, that was a nice project. Thank you, Mr. Architect.
I think it's been really important to write it in a language that is not too technical, and also create tools where you don't feel like you can be on the same page, because everybody can go out and have a look and see if there's a place to sit. They can say if they feel safe and so on. So I think there's really something fundamental human in the way it's written. Yeah, I would say written at eye level. I think there's something about the way that Jan has written his books, very approachable, that makes it of interest also to a general public, not only in Denmark, but in the rest of the world as well.
As Jan's work gained recognition, he inspired a new generation of urbanists. Among them was David Sim, who would become not just a student, but a collaborator and friend.
Funny Danish man who visited Scotland and talked about people and watching the space. And if you ask all of my classmates from 40 years ago what they remember, they'll say it was Jan Gehl sitting on the stoops in New York. And there are all these stories that they remember. And your story, that took me to Scandinavia. Eventually, in the back door, I managed to get into the Royal Academy. But anyway, I think it was something like 1993, because your story kept changing. It was constantly being upgraded. And there was one about soft edges make a soft city. And that was the first time the soft came about. It's, more than 30 years ago. And it really made me think then about soft and the humanity. And could everything be soft, not only the edges? And so that's just a little bit about the connection, that it came from these stories and this idea of softness. You were the first one to use softness, I think.
I think that David is a rather good example, one of the first very good one, who started early and have kept at it like a terrier, and have done all this work with making soft cities even softer, which I think is very commendable, and it's very good work which is being done by persons like David and maybe the city architect of Copenhagen, Camilla.
So when I've asked Jan what his most important legacy is, he always talks about his writings, the books, because they are so communicative and they can reach corners of the world where he cannot. And it's wonderful to experience other people take these theories and kind of spread the word and enable them in their own offices and in their own practices and make them part of their architectural vocabulary.
Then there's David Sim's book, Soft City, which is really taking it a step further and not only looking at city planning, but also going down in the neighborhood. How can we do neighborhood planning, which is super relevant today? So it's not only the planning of a whole city or the inner city, but also the neighborhoods, going a bit closer, presenting the principles. So again, this tradition of communicating principles to a broad audience.
Both Jan and David share the same perspective on what makes a city truly livable. It's about creating spaces where people want to be. When you are among friends, having a good time, it's not about time at all.
You said something nice about being lost in time, going to the party, and you lose this track of time.
There's a number of things you should be able to find, and that would be logical in the neighborhood. And again, it's very important that you make the neighborhood so it's inviting and people really like to be there, spend time there. I would always say that a good city is like a good party. People spend more time than they plan to do. You know, some people come to a party and say, this will be an awful party. We go early, and then it is not awful, and they go and say, it is a really nice party, and then suddenly it's 3 o'clock in the morning, and they should have gone home at 11 or 12 to relieve the babysitter, and then they realize that they stayed to 3 o'clock. And next day they'll say, when people ask, was it a good party? Yeah, it was a good party. It lasted to 3 o'clock. That means that you had a good time. You forgot the time. And the same thing should apply to a good neighborhood or good city, that it could be so good that you don't look at the watch, but you just sit there and enjoy.
It's about creating human-scale environments in dense urban settings, where small details at the street level can easily improve the entire city. David works with the concept of soft edges, transitional zones that exist between public and private spaces, encouraging interaction within the community.
So then when we talk about density in the city, like how can we achieve this while keeping the human scale of places?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah, sure.
And I guess the problem is we've identified we need this critical density for things to work.
Yeah.
But how can you make big things feel smaller? And it's almost like a trick, but I think even looking around here, like you can see on this office building, it goes like 5, 4, 3 kind of steps down. One of the simplest things that makes cities great is courtyards. The courtyard form, which is a kind of an enclosure, it makes a naturally protected space for free. So there's clean air, it's quiet, it's safe, it's protected. And because of all of those reasons, it's incredibly useful. So what I love about going to older cities is you find these courtyards. There's some great examples in Copenhagen, and some of them they've managed to break down the walls, clear out the space in between, and create really good common space in the middle. And that creates a whole new forum for neighbours to meet, children to play, people to have a nicer time living in the city. So this courtyard is extremely interesting, and there are so many good examples. One of my favourite examples of courtyard is in Christianshavn in Copenhagen. They've opened it up with a whole range of really nice shared open spaces. It's not public, but it's accessible for everybody who lives around there. And I think that's a really great space that makes city life better for living, and such a nice environment for your children to grow up, because it's really so clear. It's the courtyard. You stay in the courtyard, and there are many adventures you can have in these different places. So this thing about community, that you know the neighbours, and I guess if everybody has their own little garden, maybe you don't play together in the same way. There's a kind of, I don't know, common territory that it belongs to all the children. You've always got a playmate, because I guess maybe a lot of children in the suburbs are maybe quite lonely because there's not maybe somebody else to play with. But there's always, like, you can look out the window, you know, and this is something we learned from Gehl, up to 4 floors, that you can look out the window and you can see other kids playing and you can run out and be part of it.
It can be a spontaneous moment in your life because you don't have to plan to go to a park to sit on a lawn.
Yeah, and of course, and if the weather changes, you know, you can come out in the sunshine. The sun's shining, you can step outside into the sunshine and make the most of those few minutes of sunshine you get.
The trees are also very well kept, and I think on a micro scale we also have a biodiversity that is very rich here, because you have the larger spaces and the smaller spaces and the big trees, but also the in-between heights, because it's a semi-private courtyard and it has this security aspect. You can also have these shrubbery in this in-between height where a lot of birds and insects like to be.
It's a really simple thing, and it's made that in the history of building cities, like making an enclosure, building a courtyard, it's just a wall of buildings, and you get a protected space. And it's like, for thousands of years we've known how to do this, and we know it gives you security and safety, it gives you a better microclimate, and you kind of get it for free.
The work of Gehl and David Sim shows us that creating better cities is not just about grand designs, but about understanding human behavior and needs at the most fundamental level. Luckily, as Homo sapiens, we have a lot in common, and these ideas can be implemented around the world.
In order to make this change in cities, the first base is to understand what is happening in my city, to analyze it. And once we know what is happening, we know how to make a change. And I find it quite effectful to go out and look at what is happening other places, to take decision makers on a tour, to go and see some of the nice places around the world that have started to make a change, but to always understand, what does this mean in my context? But the local details of the craftsmanship can respond to that human scale in a different way. And I think it's always important to do that translation so you're respecting your local context. So come to Copenhagen, be inspired by our translation of those theories, but do it in your own way, because that will be much more relevant to where you are and have a more profound impact on your local culture and meet also the political needs of your own city or country.
Somebody said to me that the buildings of the future have already been built. And I think one of the big challenges we're facing for the future, we're not going to build on greenfield. We have to build on brownfield sites, close to existing infrastructure, close to existing public transport. And often we need to reuse existing buildings. And this is a real challenge, is to find projects, to find developers who want to work with these more difficult brownfield sites, with the challenges of working with existing buildings. Of course, building a city is extremely complex. There are many, many different factors we have to continue. There's the physical challenge of constructing the city with the standards and so on, engineering and infrastructure. There's also incredibly significant social context about culture. There are questions about climate and the weather. And there are also, of course, questions about economics and affordability. But I think what's important is time and time again, we go back to this human experience. And remember, it's about very simple things. Can we make a nice place to wait for the bus? Can we make a safe place for our kids to go out and play? Can we move through the city, whether we're walking, on a bike, on public transit? Can we move through the city with dignity?
We need to address climate changes. We need to address, do climate adaptation. We need to address a lot of things in city planning and in architectural projects. And somehow, stepping back and asking really basic questions about what is it really, truly we want here in terms of quality of life? How should it also be on a Tuesday afternoon? And how about the elderly, the children? Is it also going to be good for them?
I'm so grateful for being old enough to have the time to realize that you work in that and that area and seeing all the nice things you can do, because what you can do in your lifetime is limited. But if you can spread the mindset to many souls, it could be politicians, it could be developers, it could be professionals in architecture and planning. But the main thing is to develop the mindset. Because if you haven't changed the mindset, you can never change the projects. And then, if you're very old like I, you can see that actually the cities and the places become much better. That is a fantastic joy of life, to be able to do that and see that. And meet the old students all over the world. They come rushing out and say, hey, can you remember me? No, I cannot remember you, but I am very happy to know that you can use what I have tried to formulate in my books.